The very first thing that comes to mind are just the, if you will, the social constraints that were very prevalent within the Victorian society and basically in the East, you know, at that time in the 1860s and 1870s. And it was almost like when you crossed that Mason-Dixon line, once you got past, you know, Kansas and some of the others, it was just a different world. It was far more, it was brutal in many senses, and especially challenging for women. And I think a lot of those niceties, a lot of the Victorian isms, you know, that we might say, kind of went out the door, kind of went out the window just for survival. You know, a woman out west, she would offer her hand to a man. Back east, not a chance. You just didn't do that. So it's just those little things like that. But you really want to try to do everything you can to be historically accurate to the time, to the setting, to the town, the social strata, all of that. Really felt like coming home, even though I had never lived in Nashville before, born and raised in Atlanta, so an Atlanta gal. It really felt like coming home, but I have to say, I have missed the Rocky Mountains. A friend was here recently and we were driving down 65 and she said, "What do they call that mountain there?" And I said, "A hill." I said, "That's a hill, and it's just the hill by the exit on Hickory." I said, "That's not a mountain." But it's so funny because people who maybe haven't been to Colorado or haven't just seen pictures of those, that's something that you really do fall in love with, is the Colorado terrain. And I fell in love with the history there. So after 7 books based in the Colorado Territory, and loved that and was able to visit, you know, every place that I wrote about because we lived there for 17 years. So, and honestly, writing Southern fiction feels in essence like I've come home too. So it's great. One of my earliest memories from living in Atlanta is visiting an antebellum home, and that home is now, we call it the Coke House, or the Coke Mansion, I should say, because the people who own Coke live there or used to. But that mansion was boarded up when I was really young. You know, 13, 14, and we would sometimes on Sunday nights, not to vandalize, let me make that clear, but we would sneak in, as teenagers are kind of wont to do, into this boarded up antebellum mansion. If you knew where to go in the back of the mansion, you could kind of, you know, shinny through some boards and get inside. But that history and that love of history, I think, is what really sparked my interest early on, as well as a trip when I was 9 years old. For 30 days, we spent a month in Europe. And before it sounds way, way, way glamorous, it was a great trip, do not get me wrong, but there were 8 of us, yes. 8 of us in a Volkswagen Bug. But I remember visiting the castles on the Rhine River, yeah, in Germany, and running my hands along the walls of those castles as we headed down into the belly of the castle. And just, I mean, I still remember, even now I can just remember what that felt like. And I think I've always loved story, and to a certain extent I think I've always been a storyteller. So coming back to the South and moving back here, and writing about the history to which I have felt personally connected for so long a time, I think that's what I mean when it says it feels like coming home in a sense, even though I loved the Colorado Territory history and really got into that. The history of some of these places here has taken me by surprise. Belmead Plantation, for instance. I knew I wanted to write some stories about Belmead Plantation, but it was the secondary characters, just as in A Lasting Impression with the Belmont Mansion, the secondary characters are really what have driven my love, which they're real people, the real people who lived and worked in the mansions. So that's really driven my love and my passion, I think, for these stories. You know, those really grow from the history of a place that I study. And for instance, with Bob Greene, an African-American slave who is a horse whisperer, who is extremely gifted. Then you've got his owner, William Giles Harding, who was a staunch Confederate. when the Civil War broke out. He said, "I will not shave my beard until the day that the South rises again and wins, will be victorious." Well, to the day he died, he never shaved that beard. So naturally, when you think, okay, these are the real aspects of the story. These are the real people. And then, as we all know, what is the most important thing in novel and storytelling is conflict. So you look at those real characters, conflict. And so you look and you think, okay, what if I had a Southern-born son? He's from the South, but he chose to write for the Union, or fight for the Union. So he fights for the Union, but meeting him, you would never know that, because you can't have a Yankee coming to Belmead Plantation and working. General William Giles Harding would not have abided that by any means. So that wouldn't work. So I needed a Southern-born son who had chosen to fight for the Union. And then, of course, there's the conflict. That opens up a ton of conflict. And then you have a woman who her husband has just been shot for being a traitor to the South. So then from there, the conflict and the story grew.